Hi. I put Robert Steed when I write it down all the time because I don't want my initials to be BS. But I go by Bob all the time. So nice to meet you. I've seen a lot of you here before. This is the same building we did a lot of our Watershed Advisory Group meetings for the last TMDL that was developed here. So it's nice to see you all again. Oh, I have the advance here. Got it. So what I'm trying to do is help you folks, help yourselves to finding the water quality information. I can give you what the current status is of a lot of our stuff, but I'll be giving you locations to look on our website to get additional information and what you might be looking for. And hopefully by sharing this with you, you'll see what is actually available out there. So Idaho Department of Environmental Quality has primacy of the Clean Water Act for Idaho waters. What that means is the Federal Clean Water Act has a lot of conditions and requirements and all of that type of stuff, and it's EPA's responsibility to make sure that that's implemented correctly, the Clean Water Act. Well, they have given that authority to DEQ, but they still look over our shoulder and do a lot of approval type things on Clean Water Act type issues. So Idaho has adopted Idaho water quality standards, and the water quality standards are made up of two parts that are pretty important. One is beneficial uses, and beneficial use is an identification for each stream or lake on what benefits are to that. A real easy one is recreation is a beneficial use. The complicated ones, so recreation, water supply, stock, domestic water supply, we have a whole list of beneficial uses. The complicated ones are the aquatic life beneficial uses. So that is, for this part of the world, it's cold water aquatic life, and we have then criteria is the second part of our water quality standards that are applied to specific beneficial uses. So for example, if we're designated, the water is designated for cold water aquatic life, then the water temperature needs to be less than 19 degrees C on the daily average. And that numeric part is our criteria for that. There's a second part which Idaho in the last 5 years has kind of acquired, and that's the IPDS. And that's for point source discharges. So if you're going to put a wastewater treatment facility and it discharges to a water body, or anything that discharges through a pipe to a water body, that's now permitted by Idaho DEQ rather than EPA. EPA was really friendly and gave us a huge backlog, and so we're trying to catch up on that. But you'll hear about our IPDS program. We're 3 or 5 years behind on getting these IPDS permits out to people to discharge. I am in the water quality group that does the Clean Water Act stuff. Across the room in other offices are the people that do IPDS. So I can't really answer a lot of questions, but I do work with them quite a bit. And then I will certainly send all of the links to anybody that asks. I've got some business cards at the front if you need help. But most of these things you can just find with a simple Google search, say Idaho Water Quality Standards, and you'll find it. So in the Priest, I'm talking about the subbasin, which is the hydrologic unit that includes all of the tributaries that flow into the Priest Lakes and Priest River and then flow out into the Pend Oreille River down here. So for our term, that's a cataloging unit, or a USGS cataloging unit, or a 8-digit HUC is another name for those areas. But I'm kind of talking about all of the waters that flow into the Priest and out into the Pend Oreille. So in the Priest, we really have 3 causes of impairment that we see in all of our listings. It's either sediment, temperature, and we have one example of E. coli that we have. And I think that we've delisted that whole thing. So we're really talking sediment and temperature are what causes impairment in the Priest River hydrologic unit. I did put it in there that temperature has narrative criteria. We have actual numbers that we have to meet for temperature criteria. And sediment has just a lovely thing called narrative criteria. And it really states, water shall be free from excess sediment that causes impairment well, wait a second. I need a number to go with. And so we have to, when we work with sediment, have to develop the targets that we're shooting for in those watersheds that says, hey, if you meet this target, you will be fully supporting your beneficial uses in that water. And then E. coli has a really easy numeric criteria as well. I'm really sorry, I don't know why I thought I'd have a bigger screen on this, but I'll try to explain this. I'm going to pick on poor Binarch Creek a little bit because I'll just keep it in the same area. But this is water temperature data that we have, and this is an example of our numeric criteria. Water temperature data, and there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of data in here. And what the criteria says is that this water happens to be, the beneficial uses include cold water aquatic life and salmonid spawning for both fall and spring spawners. And so the criteria starts getting down. The 19 degrees is the second red line down, but as we get further into the different types of criteria, it gets more refined. And all of these have complicated calculations to get to it. Some of them are easy. Daily average temperature is pretty easy, but that MWMT, maximum weekly maximum temperature, so it's a rolling average of 7 days, and we calculate those things. But what's important is these 2 lines on the bottom are salmonid spawning. The top red line is salmonid spawning criteria for both fall and spring spawning, and you can see we occasionally exceed that line. In addition, Binarch Creek is also designated as a bull trout stream. And so it gets even more restrictive criteria all the way down to that lower red line, and we do exceed that. Now, Binarch Creek is in great shape compared to 99% of the streams that we have in the state of Idaho, but we still exceed that numeric criteria. And what that's going to result in is that really anywhere that we monitor, we find streams that are impaired for temperature. The more monitoring we do, now the temperature criteria was developed in a laboratory setting. It is showing the best growth rate for the fish given the temperatures that they get. It's a solid criteria, but when you apply it to the real world, you find that you exceed that criteria quite often. I work a lot in the Kootenai River Basin. We've got my reference stream is Long Canyon Creek up there. We exceed this same criteria with a totally unimpaired watershed. Nothing that has gone into it. No anthropogenic things in there. So it's our total reference stream, and we still exceed the criteria. So we get into this dilemma of if you monitor it, it's going to be impaired, is kind of what's happening on that. And you'll see that when I roll up the statistics on where we're at for this watershed. We've got a lot of impaired waters for excess temperature. Sure, it's kind of hard to see, but what you've got in the background is every 15 minutes the temperature that was measured at a location there. And then the green line is the daily average temperature. The yellow is weekly maximum temperature, and the dots kind of represent annual maximums is kind of what, or minimums or anything like that. So what you're just looking at is a logger that's sitting in the stream measuring temperature every 15 minutes all year round, and we bring that data in to look to see how we compare it to water quality criteria.
And that's in Celsius?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I live in Celsius. Except for the air conditioner, I know. No, but yeah, I'm sorry about that, but yeah, those are all in Celsius. And I'm sorry these are kind of gray, but Binarch Creek is cold water aquatic life, salmonid spawning, Idaho bull trout criteria, and EPA bull trout criteria. It's got the most stringent temperature criteria you can get. But I would say, compared to most of the streams I see, that's a very good temperature regime to have a stream in. Most of the world is working towards numbers like we have in our impaired streams in the pre-sub-basin. Did that get to that? Okay. So I was using that last slide not to talk you through how all our temperature, I just wanted to show you an example of numeric criteria, and that's how we look at things. Now, we have an integrated report This is what we track, all of the water bodies of the state of Idaho, and my office is responsible for the 5 northern counties. So we go pretty much all the way through the St. Joe system and north. And every 2 years, we're required to submit a report to Congress called the Integrated Report. Some of the old names for it was the 305B list or 303D list. It incorporates all of those old lists into one report. And I kind of have to walk through the categories because they'll matter to you. Category 1 is just waters that are in roadless and wilderness areas. So we've got to do a little, we don't have as many category 1s. If there's any cattle allotments or roads in there, they don't qualify. So number 2 is those waters that are fully supporting all of their beneficial uses. So these are the best quality streams are in category 2. Category 3 is I don't know. I don't know the assessment. We don't have enough data to make an assessment on that. So that's kind of the not assessed category. And then everything below that, categories 4 and 5 are impaired waters. So they're not meeting some criteria, or they're not protecting their beneficial uses in some way. Category 5 are those that are on our list to develop TMDLs. TMDLs are our prescription for how much pollution that water body can take. So we kind of say you need to reduce the pollution that we're having by 30%. It's really easy to think of it in a conservative pollutant, too much cadmium. We can tell you how much we need to reduce it to be under our criteria. But when you get into things like narrative criteria where we can say it has to be free from, then it's a little more challenging. So category 5 is just our list of streams that we need to work on. And then I've got a couple that we still are in, that Todd here will help us work on into the future, but we do have some streams up here that we need to do additional temperature TMDLs for. Category 4 are all impaired waters, but category 4A means that we've already developed the plan to reduce pollution on that, and a TMDL has been developed for it. So category 4A is a list of impaired. A lot of people think, well, once the TMDL is done, it's not listed anymore. Yeah, it's still listed. It just needs to, we still have to get all the implementation until we can take it off the list and put it back into category 2, which is that fully supported area. Category 4B is another program is in place that is more stringent than a TMDL, and we want to substitute, instead of a TMDL, we want to use that other program or project. And category 4C are waters that are impaired, but it's not by a pollutant. So the Clean Water Act, this is a tough place for us. The Clean Water Act is to reduce pollution. We have other problems out there. When I start working in habitat repairs or habitat improvement projects, that doesn't fit really good in a pollution reduction action, even though we can kind of measure what happens with it. We do see benefits from it, but Clean Water Act, we're geared to reducing pollution. And things like brook trout being introduced into a watershed, it impairs the use, but it's not necessarily the pollution that we can reduce. So I just wanted to go on these categories. We do submit that report biannually to Congress. It's approved by EPA. So we get a lot of review on that. We do talk to our watershed advisory groups and our basin advisory group to make sure everybody's agreeing with the changes that we make every year on our list. And DEQ uses all of our data that we collect, plus all readily available data. So we do search USGS databases. We make a call for data and use additional data in those requests. Things like temperature data is pretty easy to incorporate in the system, but the data has to be of a high enough quality that we can make a call on it. So sometimes data doesn't fit into us to use it as to make assessment decisions on. So I just wanted to briefly go over that the categories of the integrated report, because I kind of use that for some of the statistics I have. That's the wrong way. That's really the wrong way. All right, so streams are measured in miles. Lakes are measured in acres, so I can't really put them together on the same slide. And then we track all of the assessments we make or the status calls we make with waters called assessment units. And what that is it's kind of a hybrid of watersheds and streams. It may include several named streams sometimes. So for example, if we're in the Upper Priest, it would include several tributaries that flow into that. But I'm reporting all of the data in one assessment unit for that. And to have a individual assessment unit, you would need a land change. If they're all similar, they're all getting the same treatments, then we put them in one assessment unit. And here's the reason for that. If we looked at every segment at the scale that we're looking at streams, we would have over 400,000 streams for us to be tracking. And so by combining them, we can make good calls with neighboring streams, even though we haven't been in that one. So you'll see assessment unit used quite a bit, and just kind of think of them as little watersheds that are broken up at 1 to 250,000 scale. So that's, if you showed a map of Idaho that was about this tall, it would be a stream that showed up on a paper map. What we're looking at now is 1 to 100,000 streams, which it would take, you couldn't even cover the floor of this room with all of the maps that would be on that level. So we've got a lot of detail on these streams, but they're broken up into these small things. So first thing I'm going to show you on the pre-streams is we've got I'm sorry about the colors here, the full support is the dark blue, so it's this one right here. So that shows the percentage of full support and the percentage of not assessed. So we have a lot of waters that we don't have assessments on. You'll see later where I show you what density we've been out monitoring. We have a lot of folks monitoring it. The rest, the green area, is all of those that are not full support, either category 5. Remember, category 5s I need to do work, or category 4A, which is those streams that are already have a team deal in place. And you can see that we've got a majority of the streams have been dealt with team DLs. We just have a few new ones. And it really is outside data from the Kalispel tribe. They've supplied a lot of data that we've used, and we've seen that we've increased the number of streams that are impaired for temperature with that data. And those are on my to-do list right now, those streams. The next column over, the next chart over here, not full support 4A, these are the ones that we've got team DLs for. We've got 3 team DLs in this watershed, so we do an initial team DL and sub-basin assessment, and then we do, oh help me, what are they called, Todd? No, not that one, the addendum team DLs. So we do additional team DLs, so the 2003 is an addendum to the 2001, and the 2016 is an addendum to the 2001 and the 2003. And you can see the first team deal was all about sediment. Your author for that team deal will be up after me and can talk about that. In 2003, we had, I think, 4 sediment segments on it and 2 temperature. What was going on in there at that time is we didn't really have instructions on how to write temperature team deals. It's pretty hard. How do you say how much temperature I need to reduce? And it was between 2003 and 2016 that we developed the potential natural vegetation approach. And what that is a different play in our rules that says if you're at or approaching natural conditions in that stream, that's your target to use. So we simulate what is the natural conditions, what was the natural shade that would be in that stream, and we can measure the existing amount of shade, and we can compare that and describe where and what needs to be fixed. And it's a little bit of hocus pocus on how we develop these team deals, but the great output, the great product that you get is a deficit map. And I think I'll show that. I think that's on the next or later on in the slides. But it shows you areas that need attention. Where do we have not enough shade for these tributaries? And DEQ's done a lot of this. But the problem that we have in the watershed is how's that connected and working with the whole ecosystem, and including the main stem of Priest River. And in 2016, I think we did 28 or so temperature listed streams, and we've got 5 or 6 more that we need to do. As far as lakes go, all of our lakes are not assessed. That's not a bad thing. What that means is that they're not neither in the full support category or not in the not full support category. You know, Priest Lake is far from a eutrophic lake that's having problems. We still have concerns about pollution that's going into the lake, but it's not going to qualify for the not full support category as long as it's oligotrophic. And then the other, I just provided a lake surface area. I mean, the lake is Lower Priest, has got most of the volume, most of the surface area on it. Upper Priest is pretty small compared to that, and then the 9 others that I have listed there are just a fraction of that whole thing. So we really, when we're talking about Priest Lake, or Priest Lake lakes, most of the effort has been in Priest Lake lower. This is a tool that is on our website. You can just go into the monitoring section of our website, and what it is it's a map that can help you navigate all this. This is really large scale, but you can pick over here. You can see in this column I just said, I just want to talk about the Priest water bodies, and they get listed down below this. The mapper, as you scale in, you see more information on it. And what I wanted to show you on this is all of those red and green sites are places that our summer field crews have been doing the monitoring on these waters to determine the assessment or the status of that. Our summer monitoring program is called BURP. I'm embarrassed about the acronym, sorry about that, but it stands for Beneficial Use Reconnaissance Program. It used to be project. And so we've in this basin, I think we've got hundreds of sites that we've visited. We measure, when we're out there, we measure the biotic community, so the insects, algae, and fish in that community. We measure the habitat, and then we have certain chemistry measures that we do as well on that. And that's the basis for most of our status calls. We're pretty good at weightable stream size stuff. We can do that all day long. As we get bigger waters, we can't have summer interns go out and do this kind of stuff. We have less assessment on the bigger waters, and those require kind of a different program rather than just a standard canned program that we send everybody out to do. And matter of fact, we trained up at Beaver Creek, we trained all of the state's burp crews last week. And I know because I fed them one night, and they're a hungry group of people. I think they ate 25 pounds of pulled pork that night. So, but that just gives you a distribution. So as you pull up this mapper and look at it, you can zoom in and start getting more information pops up on your screen. Everything you can click on and find the data from, or anything you're interested on. You'll see that some of these streams are orange, some are brown. Each click will give you what the status call is on that. The brown ones are typically not assessed, and a lot of times that's because we don't have any public property or unwilling landowners to give us access to go monitor those. It's, we push a little bit, but we don't have any authority to trespass without a willing landowner. Okay, so that's our mapper. That turns the screen off. This is just one of the details you can get. Again, I think I'm picking on Binarch Creek again here. And what it has listed over on this, I think I've got a little blow up on that. You've got cold water aquatic life, and it talks about the parameter dissolved oxygen, and it says meeting criteria. So we've measured the dissolved oxygen there. You can go down to cold water aquatic life. We also measured pH, but when you get to the third cold water aquatic life, we've got sediment and siltation. It's not meeting its criteria. And over here, the TMDL ID tells you that there's been a TMDL that has been developed for that. So this is a lot of information that to help yourself, and find out information about creeks that you're interested in. Anything else, if you want to roll up big numbers and all that kind of stuff, we can do that for you with the database, but this is already readily available for everybody. So I'm going to switch from assessments and tell you what the status is and what DEQ is concerned with the 3 TMDLs that's there, the 2001 SBA, 2003 addendum, and 2016 addendum. And I participated in the last of those 3. The other two were before I've been working for DEQ forever, I think, but I came up to Coeur d'Alene area in 2004. The 2001 sub-basin assessment, it was written for two streams and both for sediment. The 2003 addendum had more streams. It had Reeder Creek, Binarch Creek, and Lower Priest River for sediment. And then we got these new temperature listings. And we were really struggling at this time. How do we work on temperature? And I don't know if you've been following the news, but our approach has been very good for us. We've gotten a lot of team deals done, but it's been challenged in neighboring states, and it may go off the rack. We may not have this tool for us to write team deals anymore, which to me would really be a disadvantage because we do get good products out for people to identify what areas do we really need to address temperature issues for. And I think I've got that. I'll show you that. This is the 2016 temperature addendum. This was only temperature, and I think we did 28 different streams. Again, it's the potential natural vegetation. I'll show you a shade deficit map, and then we used a watershed advisory group to develop that. This watershed advisory group is still in effect. It's part of our Idaho State Statute 393601, but we haven't dismissed the group, but we haven't met since 2016 either. So they're not an active group. They've been put away, and that group was really dominated by a special interest group that it was just a weird thing how that came. So this is potentially something that we could ask if this group wanted to take those roles on or something like that, that we would go through the efforts to change that whole thing. But we do have Idaho Code 393601 talks about the formation of WAGs, who has to belong on them, and they're an integral part to our public interaction requirements for TMDL development. And I've got to tell you, it's a really good thing that we do. I mean, other states are jealous for how well we interact with the public on TMDL development. All of our groups are consensus-based. We've had a couple arguments that we've dealt with by reporting minority positions, but we do get everybody's input, and it's a real value-added step to our TMDL work.
Is there any funding that goes along with being designated as a watershed group in terms of studies and stuff like that?
They can guide us towards doing more studies, which I've seen that happen, and we do follow up with that, but there's not funding available for the members of the group to use for their own studies. Yeah. Matter of fact, we're working on the Boyer Slough TMDL, and the waterkeeper took the original sample, sent them to us. It was problematic. The WAG looked at that and said, hey, we want to get more information, and we did follow that up, and we're currently writing a TMDL for that issue down in Ponderay on Boyer Slough. So these TMDLs, fun reading, guaranteed you won't be bored. No, they're kind of tough. Go to chapter 5, look at the allocations, and you'll see a lot of information on there. That's the off button. This is what I was talking about, the P&V process. These are shade deficit maps. The dark blue there means that stream is meeting the TMDL target. It's at natural conditions for shade, and shade's kind of a surrogate to me for properly functioning riparian zones too. If you have shade, you've got trees, your hyporheic water is still flowing into the river. It's a really good thing. As you get into the brighter colors, I think light blue there needs to be 19 to 10% more shade in that area. The pink color is 20 to 39, and then 40 to 100% it would be red. This scale was built on this watershed. We would show different scales for Boise watersheds or anything like that. And what this is saying is that I do have some red ones here. So Binarch Creek has a couple segments that are really lacking in shade, and that affects the stream temperature in there. And our partners, Department of Lands, Forest Service, other folks are aware of these maps, and we've targeted a lot of these problem areas to try to increase the shade in that area. But I just want to reiterate, this is a good product to have. And without it, if you just went to numeric criteria and said, hey, we need to meet 19 degrees or whatever the criteria is, it's really hard to put those in place if you don't know where to make the difference. And this P&V approach does do that. How are we doing on time?
You could have like 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Comfortably.
So I'm doing okay here. This is my list of water quality concerns that I have about the Priest watershed. I'm now stepping outside of TMDLs and 319 type stuff. These are the concerns that come up for me, or I think about. But Priest River temperature and habitat. The lower Priest River is really, it's fine to do all this work in the upper watersheds, but if they don't have the migratory corridors and the connection, it's just not going to work. And the Priest River has significant temperature problems. It is really hot, and it also has habitat, but it doesn't make sense to do the habitat improvements till we get the temperatures to where fish can live in it. And what I mean, I think we're still dealing with habitat issues related to the old log drives and everything. Priest River is very wide. It doesn't have a lot of the habitat that we need in that, and I would like to see that fixed at some point, but temperature has to be there. Another issue that I'm worried about or care about is the Priest River flow. There's a minimum in-stream flow at Priest East Fork that we haven't met for years. And that minimum flow is what's required to protect that water. That minimum in-stream flow was established by a Fish and Game Research Project. It now belongs to the Idaho Department of Water Resources Board, and I send them annual, and thanks to Todd, we get flow data at East River to demonstrate that we're not meeting this minimum in-stream flow. Another thing I'm concerned about, and the pictures there, is Priest River rock snot, also called Didymosphena geminata. It's a diatom that seems to be established strongly under the outlet dam. It's a really funny little critter because it tries to outgrow its neighbor. It's attached to a rock. It's a diatom, so it's a little glass frustule, and it grows. And when its neighbor gets in it, starts giving it shade, it grows past its neighbor, and pretty soon it's just creating these polysaccharide stalks that are 1,000 times longer than the organism to try to just keep getting to the light. And you can see it covers the surface of everything on the bottom of the river. And so where are the insects that are feeding the fish? They can't survive in this situation. And that's a concern of mine. It doesn't directly relate to my responsibilities, but it's a big concern. We haven't had one in a couple years, but another thing I'm concerned about are the Priest Lake. Did I put river? Yeah, Priest Lake Onchromonus blooms up on the Lionhead side of that. I don't know if any of you experienced it, but it's a yellow bloom. It's not a toxin producer or anything like that. It's a stink producer, and it smells like fish. And so folks that are recreating and all that get covered in fish and then go sit at the campfire. You know, it's just a nasty. It's really high in lipids. It's great for fish. It's it's a good thing to have there, but for recreation, it's a little bit concerning. Two other things that I'm concerned of, they go hand in hand, and it's development. We're getting a lot of shoreline conversion. It's happening at a rate much faster than the state agencies or the county can deal with. I'm seeing 7 to 8 proposals, not just from this basin, but for the 5 northern counties. Every Tuesday they come across my desk. And we just don't even have the time to do more than say, is it next to a lake? Okay, no, then I can't do anything about it. But the development rate is really fast. I've been pushing with Boise, our state office, that we need to start looking at development as a new non-point source. So not just silviculture, agriculture, and mining, but let's include development as the fourth leg on the stool of non-point source pollution. And with shoreline conversion, of course, I do deal with a lot of new and old septic failings around the lake because they do put a lot of green stuff on the shoreline. People are concerned about that. It's never been there before. And of course, it's always the neighbor septic tank that's doing that. You know, that's not really the case, but we do get a lot of that, and that's a big concern for me. And wasn't allowed questions. I do want to go a little bit deeper though into the water quantity. Is that mine? Oh no, okay, I thought it was over. So in water quantity, that's Idaho Department of Water Resources responsibility, it's not DEQ's. But we have this nexus between the minimum in-stream flow and the state statute that requires the lake level be held at a static 3, I think is what the number is, or something like that. I'm not clear, and I haven't got a good answer yet. What is the next? There are 2 rules. You have to follow both of them. The community upstream wants the lake to be held at that level, but we need to get more water into the stream. Just cutting off the water doesn't seem to be a good solution for that. Other areas that I work in, the Spokane River is a good example, is that we've got mechanisms set up that when we get in drought conditions that equally both sides give a little bit on that. I would like to see that in Priest Lake at some point. I do understand everybody wants the lake at a certain level and all of that, but it's at we're sacrificing the water quality in Priest River. And it's really harming the ecosystem and the fish in the river, and that Didymosphena bloom that I showed you there, it is horrendous when we get down to 30 CFS coming out of Outlet Dam. It is just destroying the river ecosystem. So that's kind of why I bring this up. I'm also concerned that we're moving forward issuing a whole bunch of more water rights all the time, and people expect to have that water. Back in 2015, I just pulled some old stuff that said, hey, there's 24 junior rights to the 97 right for minimum in-stream flow, which means when you get a water master, they're going to turn you off if you have a junior right and we're not meeting this lower flow. That's things like golf courses, irrigation, domestic water supplies. We don't want to get in that situation, and so that worries me a little bit. And Department of Water Resources is just granting, I don't want to pick on them, but they grant more water rights all the time, and it needs to be adjudicated. And just realize when we're calling for water, it's going to affect us all. So I'm encouraging again the group to consider how do in drought conditions like 2015, how do we make everybody a winner on this, not just one, and downstream folks are a loser on this. The minimum in-stream flow, it's 300 CFS it doesn't say up there, but that's at East River. That's not at the dam. During the hot months of, between August 1st and later, it's 300 CFS. We're measuring less than 100 CFS when we get to that point right now. And Department of Water Resources is required to have gauges. They should know all this stuff, but they just don't have the resources to do that.
What's causing the reduction in flow in the East River?
This is Priest River at East River. Oh, at East River. Yeah, so it's the Priest River. Okay. But that's just the point at which the study showed that that's where we need the water from there down.
My name's Glenn Rothrock, and I worked for DEQ for 22 years, from 1991 to 2013. And first of all, it's been great to see some folks that I've had work with in the past and contact. Great to see Jill Cobb, and of course I work with Bob. Tom Heron back there was my boss for 8 years. And Stan Miller worked, we probably at the beginning, Stan, how you were involved with the Priest Lake Management Plan back in the early 90s. So it's been a real treat. Kathy from Fish and Game. And Aaron did email me and said, okay, send me your PowerPoint. Well, I chuckled because I haven't done a PowerPoint in 10 years. I've been retired for 10 years. I got handwritten notes. Excuse me if I have to refer to them once in a while. And I brought some documents that I'll lay out that you can see that we as a team produced over those 10 years. And I worked for Priest Lake for 10 years full-time, 1993 to 2003. And so, but the story of the Priest Lake Management Plan starts back into the late 1980s and 1990. And there was a group of Priest Lake citizens. They're still trying to debug that. Go ahead. a group of citizens up in Priest Lake that went to Boise and petitioned legislators and lobbied legislators for Idaho law that would form a Priest Lake management plan. And their goal was a short goal to maintain the high water quality of Priest Lake. Well, that effort, and that was about a 3-year effort, late 80s, 90s, was successful. And the Idaho legislation, the Idaho legislators formed a House bill. It's called House Bill 319, 1991, and it got enacted in 1991 also as an Idaho code. And there's Idaho code in these documents. So it's encoded in the Idaho code that there shall be a Priest Lake management plan. And there are about 3 functions of that management plan, all began in 1991. A watershed, a planning team, a 12-member planning team was dictated that shall form. It became 12 members. It was formed in 1991. Jill was on that. You represented the Forest Service, Jill. We had representatives of private citizens, businesses, and government agencies, primarily the Forest Service up at Priest Lake, Department of Lands, and Idaho Parks and Recreation. And these 12 members were actually appointed by the Idaho Board of Health and Welfare. And I do apologize for looking at my notes. I haven't looked at this in 20 years. So I went through this really quick, made some notes, and so normally I don't have to look at my notes as much, but I do on this one. And that code, which is still encoded today, this is the goal of that code, and I thought it was good. The goal of a Priest Lake management plan was, goal of the Priest Lake management plan is to maintain existing water quality of Priest Lake while continuing existing non-point source activities in the watershed. So when I say non-point source activities, what do you think that might be? Some examples. Logging? Boating. Okay. Wastewater for sure, right? New home construction. So those are non-point sources, hard to pick out. That Priest Lake management plan, the Idaho legislators said, you will come back 4 years later and present the steering committee, working with DEQ, a management plan that details information processes, that details projects for reducing non-point source pollution to Priest Lake and its tributaries also. And so it was a 4-year process. I came on board in 1993, and I was assigned to the process to work with, in part, with this 12-member steering committee. In September of '95, a Priest Lake management plan was presented to the Idaho Board of Health and Welfare. It was then forwarded, it was approved and forwarded to the 1996 legislative session of Boise. And eventually, in 1996, the legislators adopted that management plan and they funded it. And I have to say the funding was pretty significant for about 10 years. It went from a lot to zero, and I'll talk about that later. And that happens with DEQ. So this will be up here, and this, oh, okay. So this is the final document, Priest Lake Management Plan, a whole host of tables that this steering committee came up with of ideas and projects of the citizens and businesses as agencies of reducing non-point pollution to Priest Lake. Most of pollution sources to the lake are non-point source. We don't have a direct wastewater discharge to the lake. There are sewage lagoon systems. There's about 5 of them, Stan, maybe 5 around there. And I'll talk about that later because there were some major improvements in those systems. So this was the first document, November 1995. Okay? And this is all this material that you can look at. It should be in the DEQ office. The second process of the legislative Idaho code was to do a baseline water quality study of Priest Lake. And that's where I was involved a lot with a fellow named Dave Mosier. Lots of help from citizen volunteer monitoring programs, the Forest Service, and so forth. It was conducted from March 1993 to September 1995. And I'm going to have to say it is really a comprehensive water quality study. It was a 3-year study. We covered chemical and physical aspects of Priest Lake water quality. We covered phytoplankton populations. We were able to hire contracts to do primary productivity, to do macrophytes attached aquatic growth that grow up from the sediment. We had limiting nutrient studies from a professor out of Portland. Growth on shoreline rocks in Priest Lake, so it was really comprehensive. And I'm really hoping that if a group gets sufficient funding again in the future, that this will be a decent baseline study to look back upon and compare with, because that's what we tried to do in science. We want to know, okay, I'm doing something in 2040, what did it look like back 50 years ago? And so you're really hoping that data 50 years ago holds up to being a valid comparison, and I hope it was. So this was produced in 1997. Took me a while to finish it, Dave and I. And it's phase 1 diagnostic analysis, Priest Lake, Bonner County, and this is the water quality studies. And it's comprehensive and includes data and lots of contract information. So once that was completed, it became time to implement the Priest Lake Management Plan. And the Priest Lake Management Plan Steering Committee was reformed. Much of the same folks, some new folks. It went from a 12-member to a 15-member steering committee, and that's what it was called. It was a Priest Lake Steering Committee to 15 folks, and so it had 3 kind of focuses. Information to the folks who lived around Priest Lake. It had project planning, areas of pollutant reduction to Priest Lake, that projects were identified, and then it had implementation of those planned projects. And this was, again, a cooperative effort between the homeowners around Priest Lake, the various governmental agencies that work around Priest Lake and have offices in Priest Lake. Bonner County was part of it, had some government agencies, and as much of the business community that we could develop, and that home construction and so forth. So just a couple of examples. I'm going to chuckle at this one. Just a couple of examples of implementation things that we did for the first 4 or 5 years. Right off the bat, I wanted to start a newsletter. And this was sent out to every identifiable address around Priest Lake. And it began in 1995, and the last one I could find was 2002. So it went for a 7-year period. Information and information on pollutant reduction projects that we had planned. This last one that we did a major project on a lot of the dirt roads around Priest Lake. You know, Priest Lake servicing the Forest Service lease lots. They're not state lease lots anymore, are they? Did Department of Land sell all those off? They're almost all sold. And there's lots of small, steep roads, gravel roads, dirt roads that go down to those cabins. And there's many types of methods of implementation that you can do to control the velocity of the runoff and the sediment off those roads that might go into Priest Lake, and we had lots of documentation that they did go into Priest Lake. So this particular newsletter went through that and different things that homeowners can do to improve their access roads. We had workshops, we had lots of cost sharing money, so we cost share with various landowners to put these various mechanisms in. So that particular newsletter talked about that, and then we had a newsletter that talked about wastewater. And one of the projects that was another example of a project that we had funding for is on the east side, where many of the older lease lots had septic drain fields within 25 to 50 feet of the lake. And the current code with Panhandle Health is 300 feet. So we cost shared with Department of Lands. They identified it. We've got folks that wanted to volunteer to do that. We went a 50-50 cost share to remove those septic drain fields 300 feet plus from Priest Lake, and that required some pumping from the septic tank. So that was another example. Another example of implementation, and this one's the one I had a chuckle with, from Molly. By the way, I work with Molly too. Where's Molly? There. Molly in Sandpoint, and I recognize Molly. I recognize her right away. And some of you may know Jamie Davis, who also was in the Sandpoint effort there, and she took my job 10 years ago. So with a contract from a fellow named Lance Holloway, and let me get the organization correct. Where was Lance from? Idaho Association of Soil Conservation Districts. Molly, is that the organization you work for?
At the time that you and I were working together, I worked for Bonner Soil and Water Conservation District.
Okay.
Yep, they took over the Lake Assist program.
Okay.
They implemented your program.
So the organization of Boise was the umbrella, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, they were the umbrella. Anyway, Lance, I contracted with him, and we came out in June of 2000 with something called a Priest Lake Assist program. And the reason it was really cool, because Molly showed me that this actually, with Molly's work and her associates, has been updated into this pamphlet, 22 years ago? 22 years after this came out. And so it's still going. It's really cool. And I haven't looked at that, Molly, but I will. But essentially, it was a series. Every one of these packets was sent to all known addresses of property owners in Priest Lake. And they were a series of 8 subject matters. This is stormwater runoff, for example. For example, stormwater runoff from dirt access roads into all of the homes up there, and how to make stormwater velocity less, how to have less sediment go into Priest Lake. So this pamphlet was informational about stormwater runoff, and then in association there was a worksheet where a homeowner would walk around their land and look at various categories of stormwater runoff and evaluate their property as either low, medium, or high risk. And if they had a high risk situation, a badly steep eroding road that was going right into Priest Lake, of which we have lots of pictures of, then this information pamphlet would help them with our agency or the Forest Service or Department of Lands, try to put in implementation projects that would reduce that velocity. So then there was 8 of those, and it was really great, Molly, to see that that has continued and I'm sure improved. So there are projects like that, and those are just some really quick examples. One project out of that had nothing to do with that, is that we produced a bathymetric map of Priest Lake. And so this, I believe, was really the most accurate. It's when GPS really started getting its technology together, and so that this and a GIS program, we produced a bathymetric map, which was really kind of neat. Then, and I'm really glad, Bob, you preceded me, because I had, in the year of 2000, I was reassigned. And I was still working with the Priest Lake community with implementation of the Priest Lake Management Plan, but I was also reassigned to produce sub-basin assessments and TMDLs for the hydrologic unit Priest River Sub-Basin. And Bob mentioned hydrologic unit. And you won't be able to see this because I didn't do a PowerPoint, because I don't do PowerPoints anymore. But the Priest Lake hydrologic unit goes all the way up to past Canada. So the Priest, and it's called the Priest River hydrologic unit. It includes Upper Priest Lake, Lower Priest Lake, all of these watersheds that drain into the lake and the river, and it extends actually past the Canadian line. And so it's a huge area. And as Bob had mentioned, I had never done a TMDL before. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So it took me a while to figure it out, and I didn't really figure it out completely. But again, their Clean Water Act, Section 303D of the Clean Water Act, water bodies listed that are considered impaired, which Bob explained, of beneficial uses. And the two beneficial uses at that time that were really prominent in the Priest River Basin were cold water biota, impairment of cold water biota. You do a stream and you're collecting for insects and you don't find any insects that are considered cold water insects. That's an example of the kind of sampling that would identify cold water biota. And salmon spawning. Those were the two that were listed for most of those listed tributaries to Priest Lake. And the main pollutant of concern, which again is the term that Bob used, at that time was sediment. In fact, I think there was only one where temperature came up. Maybe it was Pine Arch Creek. I'm not sure. So if you look at this stream, and I ear tagged it if you want to look at it after the presentations, these stream watersheds were the ones that were on the 303D list beginning in probably about 1994. When was the first list? 94. Okay, 1994. And again, as Bob emphasized, it's the states that nominate these streams for impairment to EPA, because it is a Clean Water Act. So this first publication, Sub-Basin Assessment, Total Maximum Daily Load, really only covered those tributaries to the lake itself and not to the lower Priest River Basin. And so there were sediment TMDLs that were produced for these that are in this document. There was, however, a section in this document that addressed lower Priest River itself. And the listed, and lower Priest River was on the 303D list for sediment, not temperature, curiously, because it's obviously a temperature impaired stream. And the segment begins where Upper West Branch of Priest River flows into the lower branch and then down to the Pend Oreille River. So I have that ear tag too if you wanted to look at the map of that listed. And at the end of that, there were several watersheds that were deferred. And remember, we had also a watershed advisory group. Was it called a WAG? And it was the same group as the steering committee. And Jill really helped me out on this whole 3-year process of sub-basin assessment and TMDLs. I remember, Jill, we had lots of meetings, and I was really trying to scratch my head for the west side of Priest Lake. We deferred several watersheds for an addendum to collect additional information. And one of the additional informations we did not have, Kathy was involved with, and I think this would have been 2001, Kathy, if you were part of that, was a comprehensive fish survey by Idaho Department of Fish and Game of much of the lower Priest River. And that information is available in the next document that I will show you. And then this first document said that USGS data from their gauging station on lower Priest River really suggests that temperature ought to be added as a pollutant of concern. And intuitively, we knew that already, but it hadn't been at that time. So after a couple more years of work, there was an addendum, and Bob showed these two slides. So again, lots of help from the agency folks. It's an addendum to Priest River Sub-Basin Assessment. And there's a section on lower Priest River, and I have that tagged too. And I actually did a sediment TMDL for lower Priest River. And there was a recommendation by several folks, including the Watershed Advisory Group, that we should delist sediment as a pollutant of concern for the lower river until we did a riverbank assessment. So we spent several weeks out looking at the stream bank, the river banks, of lower Priest River, and they're really in bad shape. They're obviously just bleeding sediment into the river. So we made that argument, and that argument was accepted. So sediment was kept on as a pollutant of concern, and a TMDL for sediment actually was done on that. And I don't know if any of you floated the entire stream. When you get down lower, boy, those banks they're high and they're bare, and they bleed a lot of sediment into the river. So that was in this particular document. The USGS gauging station clearly showed that temperature ought to be added as a pollutant of concern into the Lower Priest River. This addendum also, there was a new category of beneficial uses, and I don't know where this came in from. It's called cold water aquatic life, and it's based on collection of sampling material, and it was clear from the new data that we obtained that Lower Priest River, that cold water, it was appropriate for cold water aquatic life designated use. It was given a new use, probably a new term, and that there was temperature and sediment violations, and it was not fully supported. Cold water aquatic life was not fully supported. And temperature was added in the 2002-2003. So that's this document in the appending. You can look through that, and it's time for me to wrap up. What happened in 2003 is the legislative session killed my funding. I went from a lot to zero. And I was reassigned to work with the Coeur d'Alene tribe and do a Coeur d'Alene lake management plan and lots of water quality studies. Tom Heron was my boss. And so that my last bit of time in Priest Lake, Priest River was 2003. And then I retired in 2013. So it's been a while. So I think I'll wrap it up there, and I'll just leave this material here.
This work is in collaboration between the USGS and the Kalispel tribe, and these are the folks that I want to acknowledge. Michael Brett is also a collaborator. He is from the University of Washington. He is a limnologist who is analyzing our fatty acid samples from the invertebrates that I'll be talking about. And then another person that I need to acknowledge is Phil Kaufman from the EPA. He was a great help writing the paper, the 2021 paper that I think Eric has talked about a lot on some presentations, and I hope I'll present a couple of slides from that paper as well. So, God, without my glasses, yeah, I know, but my glasses, I'm blind. Okay, so this is the outline of the presentation. I probably don't need my glasses. First, I'll give a brief comparison of the Priest and other mid-sized rivers in the Pacific Northwest, and also talked about future temperature scenarios and those are both from the Northwest data. The Northwest data is publicly available, so anyone can download it at the Forest Service website. Work by Dan Isaac mostly at the Rocky Station. And then I'll talk also briefly about water temperature effects on cold water fishes. I think Bob kind of talked a little bit about it, so I'll just go a little more into that. And then just preliminary results on our studies. We had the food quantity and quality at river confluences, and this is work that has taken a while because of COVID, and the analysis of Mike Brett took a little long to present it because he lost his lab manager and he had other issues. And then the thermal patterns of the temperature, the thermal patterns of main stem, pools, and tributary confluences. This is data we collected in 2018, 19, and 22. All this data, the 2018 and 19 data, temperature data, is available at this website. This is the science-based website from the USGS. And you download all that. And then there's the paper in Ecological Indicators Journal is open access, so you can access that paper as well. And the data is publicly available, or most of it at least, because we use the NARS data, which is the National Aquatic Resource protocols and just a program. So on medium-sized rivers, or basically non-wadable streams. So here is, I think some of you are familiar with this graph, and this is data from Northwest. And we have latitude and longitude here on the axis, and a gradient of water temperature. We grouped our about 78 rivers. We categorized them as medium size, between 30 and 60 meter wide, and a slope of 1 degree. Yeah, 1 degree. Sort of comparable to the Priest. And we group them in quantiles, or quartiles. And so the lowest quartile, the 25th quartile, was the coldest rivers, and the 100th quintile was the warmest. And then the Priest River, we sort of lump all those, we had about 10 sites. And so when we compare them across, we found that John Day was the warmest, and the middle fork of the Flathead was the coldest. But then, as you can see, Priest is pretty warm, and this is mean August temperature data. So one thing to note is that some people have criticized using, mean August data to talk about thermal patterns, or overemphasize that, because we need to think about the whole life cycle of the fish. So, but bear in mind that it still kind of holds when you look at future scenarios, because sort of the crunch time. So here we have the current conditions according to the Northwest data, and this is the site, to download that data if you, and this is for the entire West Coast, basically. And so I'm just focusing on the lower and a little bit of the, the lake. And these are all the streams. And in the current conditions, we have that they're somewhere between 18 and 21 degrees in the main stem. And some of the tributaries, the larger tributaries are, between 15 and 18. And then the coldest are the headwater streams, which, makes sense upstream. And then, but then in the future, in 2040, I think we expected that the main stem is going to, get closer to 24 degrees. So between 21 and 24. And this upper west branch and the lower west branch will be also pretty warm. And in general, just all the streams will be a lot warmer. And it looks more like this side of the watershed, but I'll get a little more warm. So with the think in mind that that data set is focusing on the mean August temperature, we have to think about what happens the rest of the year, right? And so when we think about temperature and that is hot, even within a hot segment of a stream, there's cold water patches. And those patches can help fish to cope with that thermal stress, if they're there. When river gets so disturbed that it's all very homogeneous, there's no place for the fish to really find that, respite, right? But if they have groundwater springs, groundwater-fed springs, or thermal, tributary junctions that are colder than the main stem, then they can just hang out in there. In the summer, that's sort of the crunch time, right? And so this figure here shows the growth potential. And so yellow indicates better growth potential and blue worse. And so in the summer, the growth potential in the lower reaches of rivers, this is the John Day River, but is better in the headwaters or medium, sort of the middle reaches. But in the fall and the spring, that's exactly where the productive areas are, or the growth, the good growth is. So we need to consider that when we think about thermal patterns in rivers. It's important to focus on the summer because it's a crunch time, but also to think about how do we deal with the others. And they did some modeling analysis of a few species, salmon and cutthroat. And basically, the optimum growth is way, below what they're actually fish is experiencing, because the daily mean temperature range when the study was, took place was in this gray zone. So that's where the fish are not, growing as well, or actually their growth rate is declining. So that's one of the main consequences. Along with that, declining growth, if it's too far off their optimum temperature, is predation risk, higher predation risk from non-natives or even natives that are, like for example, a bull trout is pretty sensitive to temperature, but a rainbow trout is not as sensitive. So there will be some competition, potential predation from bass or other non-natives, higher disease risk, food web changes, aquatic invertebrates, benthic periphyton. So all those things that can have an effect when the thermal regime changes. So with that in mind, we decided to design a study along with the tribe, looking at selected tributary junctions that looked those places where there may be opportunity for the fish to seek thermal refuge. And so one of them is the East River. And this is sort of an example of a cool finding. In the East River, we knew that the East River is cooler than the main stem, but we didn't realize that there was also other sources of cool water along the other side. And we found 2 springs. And actually, the seamount was bigger than the tributary, especially because there are 2 of them on this side. So it was kind of astonishing to find, just from flying overhead, what we found. So that was cool. So we did that after we collected the data from the, they just got the drone last year, right, Eric? Yeah, so this is another shot of that. So here is where the the East River is. The plume is coming this way. The other plumes are coming this way. And so that was something that always baffled me, that I saw that the fish were not really in the middle. The fish were kind of on the sides. And I'm like, why are they on the other side? Well, it's because they're hanging out on the cold plume here. So so I think they're using those 2 areas and not just the one plume that I was thinking they were using. So this is the schematic of our sampling. We selected about 5 different confluences, and we collected invertebrate and periphyton biomass in the tributary, upstream of the tributary, and at the junction. And so we're trying to figure out, so our hypothesis was that we think the warmer river is going to have more biomass, more bugs, or bigger bugs, but the tributaries are going to have better quality, food. They're going to be fatter, the tributary. And the differences, depends on the tributary. Some are a lot cooler than others. And this one is not as, the differences are not as stark. This is sort of a spring. It's a really cool little tributary, and it's very cold. I think this here is just an anomaly because the logger may have been out of the water, but it's way cooler than the main stem, as you can see. This is the East River, and we were surprised that the East River wasn't as cold as we thought it was. But I think the other side over here is where, maybe it's even colder than that side. So when we did this, we didn't know about the existence of those other springs. And then this is Big Creek. And this is Quartz and Sadler. So we collected data on all these tributary junctions. So this is just sort of give you a flavor of what kind of data we're going to get. So this is the biomass from mayflies. And this is at the junction, at the tributary, and at the upstream site. And there's a lot of variability within just one species, one order. But I think as we analyze more data, hopefully we'll see more patterns, and our hypothesis comes, we're right or maybe we're wrong. And then now, in terms of the quality, so we all need PUFAs or omegas, 3s and 6, right? So fish are the same. And so here we have an ordination plot. And I'm sorry for, this is a little maybe too mathy for this group. But so anyway, I just wanted to show that we selected some of those more common fatty acids. And so here, these three are like the higher quality. This is what the fish want to eat, what the bugs want to eat, right? And they're mostly derived from diatoms. Diatoms are kind of like the best kind of food. And then these are they're good food, but they're not as good quality. These are the alpha-linoic acid and the linoic acid. And so the linoic acid basically comes from terrestrial detritus or low quality, like filamentous green algae, these two. So we're hoping that once we look at all the species, all the orders that we have, collected, and when we're gonna have a range of temperatures, we can see better, what's happening in terms of like where the best food is located. And can help. I think this will help us to inform restoration places, prioritization, that kind of thing. Just to give you a little summary of that, I think these are very dynamic areas. They're constantly changing depending on the flows, as the summer progresses, temperatures. So we really need to understand the role that these places play on the food quality and the food quantity for fish. So I'm going to move now to the next study, which was the temperature just patterns. And we're focusing on the entire lower 70 kilometers, and we place loggers every 2 kilometers and 17 tributaries. There was a lot of vandalism, unfortunately, so we lost quite a few loggers, but we still, because we have so many, we still are being able to have inferences on this. And we also did the two longitudinal profiles, or floats basically, with Trout Unlimited in 2018 and 2019. And I'll be showing data from 2018. So here are, I think Mary and Dan, here floating. And then these are folks from the Freshwater Map Company out of Big Fork. They came down and they floated the river and they did bathymetry. So we have, now we know where all the pools are located and, all sorts of features. And these were the methods. We collected temperature in the main stem, tributaries, and in the pools with the surface and bottom. So this is the data. Well, it looks washed out. This is the data from the float on August 21, 2018. And we also did a float in August of 2019. The temperatures are very different because there were 2 different days, right? And one was a lot warmer than the other. Actually, this is the not so warm day. But the patterns sort of remain. And we had 10 groups. The segments were between 4 kilometers and 8 kilometers. And everybody started, all the teams started at the same time, 10:30 in the morning. And so these are kind of give you an idea of what the different reaches segments look like. And so here's the data for each of the segments. They all started at 10:30, and as you can see, the team that started at 10:30 at the outlet dam was a lot warmer starting, and they all sort of warms up as the day warms up. So we wanted to get rid of that pattern or that trend, and so we detrended the data just to be able to observe the features that were sort of causing those anomalies, they call them turbine anomalies, those dips in the data. And we were able to sort of match that with features in the landscape, because as people floated, we synced with a GPS unit, and so we were able to pair it up. And so here is Arch Creek this black here, that's a Springbrook, it's a Springbrook near 65, which a Springbrook is basically some groundwater seepage. And then here some wetlands and some seepages around River Kilometer 30, which is basically where there's a bend on the road, Forest Service 554. Oh, 334. And there were some fish hanging out there. So in terms of the bathymetry, we used pressure transducer when the folks floated, so we also had depth information. And we compared it with our bathymetry data, and it happened that if you have a low budget and you want to do this again somewhere else, you can actually, it shows the pools show up pretty well. The only issue is that sometimes if people don't release the rope completely, or they don't go on the tall wake, but they go on the shallow end, you're gonna miss the pools. But for the most part, we were able to follow some of the pools that we found in the bathymetry, with the pressure transducer. And so, one of the reasons why we wanted to go back and revisit the pools, because in 2018 we had sampled pools that were the pools that the fish were using, and that the tribe had suggested we sample. And they were kind of small, and they were in the upper, closer to, between Deacon Sheet and maybe River Kilometer 50, which is Eden Landing. And none of those pools were stratifying. So we thought, well, we just missed the certification because they're not big enough. So we wanted to make sure that we, observed some certification. So we went, the only pool that was small was this one, which was here where that big seepage was. And we found that it did stratify, but not all the time, sometimes here. And we still need to figure out why it did well, we know it's because of the groundwater, but why didn't it stratify the whole time? So that's still trying to figure that out. But then for the other pools, we sample about 6 pools. And this is the deepest pool in the river, basically, River Kilometer 19. And it did not stratify. The same thing with River Kilometer 18, did not stratify. And the other pools that we sampled did not stratify. So it was warm, top to bottom. And I think it's just because of the warm releases from the dam, and it just doesn't, it's warm, it just doesn't, there's nothing there, there's no cold. And so this is just to tie it to the data we had, because independently we also had estimates of residual pools from the NARS data, or the EPA protocol that the tribe had followed in 2011. And we know that comparing to other rivers in the region, the Priest River has actually almost twice as many pools for every single category of pools that we looked at. And so that would be really great if we could somehow be able to provide some enhancement to those pools so they can provide better habitat. Because there are twice as many than the cold rivers. And so here is a lot of data. I'm sorry. So this is just sort of, so I gave you the longitudinal or the float information, data, and now the loggers that we collected in 2018. So we collected loggers every 2 kilometers, but some of them got vandalized, but we still managed to have quite a few. And this gives us a really nice look at what's happening in the entire river. Kind of like the same way that longitudinal, that float gave us. So on the x-axis is temperature, and on the y-axis is river kilometer. The 68 is closest to the outlet dam, and 2.5 is closest to the mouth. And as you can see, the is incredibly consistent. How the median temperature is just, is pretty close all over the place. But the closest, and unfortunately we lost some data on the one that was the closest, but we have this 68 is pretty close to to all of them anyway, and it's the warmest. But then here, on the area that I pointed out where most of our other pools were, there's a slight dip on the temperature. And I think is that even though the pools were really warm, it provided some sort of cooling effect at the segment scale, like over here. And it's a slight change, but looking at the entire river being so consistent, that's something, right? So here on the daily, we can see that the river is also is just so consistent, no matter where you look at it. But there is, again, that section of the river that is slightly cooler. And of course, towards the end, when the nights get cooler, that's when you start seeing a cooling of the river. And then the tributaries, they paint a much brighter picture. Here we have on the x-axis temperature, and on the y-axis we have tributaries that are organized by kind of they're kind of far apart, but that's Bernard, that's River Kilometer 48, that's Murray, East Creek, Benton, Fox, Big Creek, Prater, Quartz, Ranger, Blue, Lower West Branch, and Sadler. And so we do have some streams, a lot more streams that are below 20, the median temperature. And these are pretty, July 29 to August 16. So this is kind of the peak of the hot season. And then I think one thing to take from this graph is that in terms of the daily temperature, is just that the streams are a lot more resilient in terms of like if they're a certain temperature, like for example, Bernard, if they're really cold, they manage to be, they withstand more the changes in the air temperature, I think, more so than, especially these ones, the very cold ones, maybe they're groundwater influence or snow melt. And then, but there's some that are fairly warm, like Blue Creek and Murray. So this is just to bring back that same idea. I grayed out any time of the day. This is time of day that was over 20 degrees Celsius, and I just picked 20 out of the bag, just so you can see that in the main stem, during this period of July 29 to August 16, it's fairly warm. There are a lot of places and all times of the day that is over 20. Versus in the tributaries, there are only a few tributaries that are, warm enough that doesn't work. But, there are some pretty cool tributaries. Here, my final thoughts on that. So the river was fairly consistent, their median temperature, the mean temperatures. That major changes in the temperature were associated with either groundwater inputs, wetlands, or tributary confluences. And most pools do not stratify, and when they're clustered, they may have a cooling effect. And one thing that we have really done a good job of characterizing the summer, but we really need to understand the shoulder seasons if we're interested in growth and see, to better see, what's happening on those two sides. And then I think the area where there's more hope for restoring or enhancing habitat, I think is some of those tributary junctions. And that's it. There's more work to do, basically.
Okay, the first part is what happened to the Watershed Advisory Group, and then kind of what next steps need to be taken on that. Can you rephrase it so I can get the whole question?
Yeah, just why did it dissipate, and then what can we do to jumpstart it again? It's definitely, we've got a lot of people who are probably interested in participating, and I think it's kind of a next step, rational step for this river.
Sure. That Watershed Advisory Group went through some kind of turmoil in the beginning. And so it was, I don't know how to really say it, but it was dominated by a group of people that were not interested in implementation. They were kind of interested in getting the TMDL done. So we haven't revisited or worked with that WAG because we just don't expect any implementation to be done on that. It's fine to start that group up. If there's any interest at all, we can call or we can reconvene that group. We'll see what members still show up, and we can work on the next steps, which would be implementation. Keep in mind that DEQ doesn't push all of that implementation. That's our designated management agencies that push a lot of that as well. So we would need to work with the designated management agencies. In this case, if it's forest practices, that would be Department of Lands, so they really would run with the flag on that one.
Do you see any value in that, in having two groups basically trying to do the same thing? Because I think this group is interested in implementation.
I think that I'm willing to work with any group that's interested in implementation. So we can do that. What we would have to look at is over the long run, if this group's making implementation, I would really want them to be designated as the WAG so that it fits within our statutes.
So I have another question. There was a sub-basin assessment in 2016, right? We've had a long discussion in this group about whether we need to commission another sub-basin assessment for us to move forward. It sounds like there's an awful lot of data out there already. What's your view?
So the question is, do we need another sub-basin assessment? The sub-basin assessments that we write are pretty generic and talk about what the geology is, what the road network is, that type of stuff. I don't think that's changed as much. What you're asking for is another product that DEQ produces, and it's called a 5-year review. And that's where we look at where we are on the status of meeting our TMDL objectives and what the current status is. And that is something that we should have done a couple years ago. Even though they're called 5-year reviews, they're typically on a 10-year cycle just because of resources.
I've got a question for Glenn. Did you do conductivities at all when you, back in the 90s? Did you do conductivity tests?
Yeah, we did. We had a multi-parameter machine, piece of equipment, conductivity, pH, dissolved oxygen, light extinction. Oh, there's probably another one or two there.
The reason I'm asking the question is I haven't seen that data, but that's because there's just so damn much data.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at everything.
It's in there.
But I have noticed that the conductivity in Upper Priest Lake is almost double what it is in the main lake.
Yeah, it might be. I'd have to go back and review. We did both lakes.
Yeah.
Lots of trips up to the Upper Priest Lake, and I didn't review the data. I
Yeah,
did.
but what I'm saying is, do you have any ideas why the upper lake would be so much different than the main lake?
Higher mineralization, I suppose. Yeah. Different types of watersheds, different types of soils. That's usually where you get your minerals. Conductivity is a matter of electricity through minerals and ions. And one thing I didn't mention is that we also did for Priest Lake, we did a water budget. So we did a lot of stream work on both east side and west side. So we put up flow stations, and so we had a pretty decent idea of what comes in, what goes out. And then again, the sediment
Now, my
index.
next question, how did you measure those flows?
We set up gauge stations.
Were you set up
Yeah.
for
Yeah, and Betsy doesn't know this, but my partner was Dave Mosier. He was about 6'4", and we were doing spring runoff at Hunt Creek on the east side. And if it wasn't for him, my body would probably still be in Priest Lake somewhere, because I was going, and he got me by the shoulder, and that was just step, with a velocity meter and go across. So we did that in conjunction of we had stations like at Granite Creek and Trapper Creek, flow stations. So for 3 years.
Glenn, you'll be pleased to know that all your data is in a database.
Oh, okay. That's his.
Go for it, Betty. Okay. Hi. Bob, your photograph of Didymo, I live on the Priest River below 8 Mile Rapids, and we have it all in front of our house. It goes a quarter mile. It's on both sides of the river. It appeared 20 years ago or so, and I met Glenn because I took a slimy rock to a meeting in Coeur d'Alene, and I said, what is this? And you told me at the time that it was from sediment loading and water temperature, but until people, there wasn't enough money to do anything about it at that time, but until enough people got interested in the health of the river, it would continue. So I'm telling you, 20 years later, that's what it looks like. And now we don't have crayfish, but we do have bull-nosed catfish. We have no trout. We got lots of big smallmouth bass. We have different kinds of plants growing in the river that shouldn't be growing in the river. And I want to thank you for your photograph, because I keep saying Didymo. I come to these meetings, and that's the first good picture I've seen. Would you like your grandbaby to go sit in a puddle of that and play in the shallow of the river? That's what we have. So I'm concerned with, of course, I want a healthy lake, because if the lake is healthy, then that helps the river be healthy. But I got a question for you. This year, Huckleberry Bay's sewer district had serious issues in non-compliance. Irrigation taking place in April and October when it shouldn't. Inflow to the lagoon wasn't recorded. There's no testing of chlorine levels. Coliforms were markedly elevated in September. Irrigation pump wasn't tested, and lift pump hours were not recorded. So I understand that all the sewer districts up there give an annual report. So we need DEQ to get on their case and figure out what the heck they're doing wrong up there. And I think the folks that live at Priest Lake have an excellent article that compares all 5 of the sewer districts up there, with Huckleberry being, I'm sorry, that was Huckleberry Bay I was talking about, I apologize. Kalispell Bay gets, if you rate them A through F, Kalispell Bay gets a C-, Huckleberry gets an F. And if you would like to take a look at this article, I would like to share it with anybody that's interested, because to protect the lake protects the river. And anyhow, thank you for your photograph. I'm so glad to finally have a visual so people can understand what's going, and it's going to happen in other spots all up and down the river, and you're going to see it at Priest Lake unless we take some action.
Yes.
I have a question specific to Didymo as well. Because we talked about this at a steering committee meeting. Has anybody looked at the tributaries for Didymo? Is it documented on tributaries at all, or is it just a main stem issue? I associate it with like below dams, but I don't know that.
I never encountered it, at least the tributaries of Florida Lake. It's just there.
There's never been a real look at it.
I'm going to struggle with this answer because Didymo is a very difficult organism to deal with. I saw, Max Bothwell's presentation at University of Idaho about 5 years ago. And he's the one that Didymo inundated New Zealand. He's the first person that saw it. And his theories on why it exists is not because of pollution. It's a nutrient imbalance that's in place that gets it established, and then once it's established and you add nutrients to it, it grows like crazy. But it's not something, it didn't get here from poor water quality. So it does well at tail races of dams, and that's usually where you get your brood stock growing. They detach, they go further downstream, and it keeps doing that. And I don't have a good answer on control other than time. New Zealand was completely inundated at one time with rock snot, and it is now got a lot less. So I think we've got to reduce pollution. I think that's really important portion of it, but it's also an organism that wrecks its ecosystem for itself too, is what I've heard.
And so if some of these sewer districts are putting in nutrients, are they contributing to its growth? Are they helping it grow?
I would need to do a lot of work to figure out if the nutrients from Huckleberry Bay is not being absorbed and used in the lake and making it to the river. It's pretty.
From what we've seen, the lake is uniformly low in nutrients. So there's no indication in the lake of any of these wastewater systems affecting lake quality, even though we know there's problems in the system. The
I thought-
nutrients in the lake aren't showing. So what's going down the river is really low in nitrogen and phosphorus.
Are they adding phosphorus to the Kootenai River to control Didimo? I thought that's what some people.
No, the addition of phosphorus to the Kootenai River is to increase benthic growth because it's so nutrient starved that the sturgeon are not having enough food.
So I can speak to that a little bit, because I added nutrients to the Kootenai. But, you know, the Kootenai is a system that is very low in phosphorus, and there is a big Didimo problem below Libby Dam. And even below Libby Dam, the phosphorus is pretty low. And so there have been a couple of graduate students who have done work there. And like Bob, it's very confusing, you know, the different stages of Didimo and what it thrives on in its different stages. But I would say those studies that were done on the Kootenai are a view of how it's successful. But again, in that case, it's not a lot of phosphorus in the system. So it's not increased phosphorus that's making it thrive there. It's
No,
some
I mean, the
other-
control, yeah. I think that was the aim, right?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, if you have a lot of phosphorus in the system, you're not gonna necessarily get a lot of big.
I have a question for Glenn. Glenn, are you aware of any studies at all pre-1950 in as to what the in-stream flow was in the river?
Well, if it was, it would have been USGS. I'm not aware of it, but
The gauge at Priest River, the one downstream,
Yeah.
that's been in for 70 years.
yeah, that's what I thought.
The Hick and Sheet one's only been in for a couple of decades, so it's post-dam. But the one downstream, and I think you could probably develop a pretty decent correlation between the two.
I'll just add to that, Alan, the microfiche that's available at Department of Water Resources. You can look it up on your computer, and it has all of those old documents in it, you know, anything that existed for water flow.
Water resources?
Yeah, Department of Water Resources for,
Well, the USGS gauge is online too.
Yeah, we plotted that for Aaron's proposal to get the funding, right? I don't know, you provided that in the proposal? Yeah, we have those graphs.
It's in the grant proposal, which is online, and I've shared it with the steering committee, but it kind of talks to that.
Stan, this microfiche I'm talking about has the pre-USGS type information, if it exists.
Is there temperature data for that too?
It's just random pieces of documents and letters and all kinds of stuff in there. But it's a real resource if you want to go back in time. That microfiche is really important.
Oh, the flow data is in the gauge.
Okay.
The flow data is in the gauge, you know, data. USGS.
There's continuous flow data at USGS gauge back to like 1920, and it goes back to 1903. It's a little spottier between 3 and 20, but 20 on is continuous daily flow data.
I have a question for Francine. So we're talking about possible enhancement of the cold water pools or deep pools in the river, deeper, I guess. Any thoughts as to how that could be accomplished?
I'm sorry, your name?
Alan.
Alan is asking if there's any thoughts on how to improve the pools that we sampled. I think providing some in-stream structure to some of those areas, and also like prioritizing. For example, the one that stratifies, I think that would be a great candidate to do some, in-stream structures, I think, adding some large rooted debris and those kind of things. The larger pools, I think, a little harder, but I think you could, you can look at, if there's, you gotta look at each case, but I think you could. And Yeah, you could also do some modeling, and actually, if one of the considerations is to do cold water releases, you could model and see if there would be some oil certification, and there would be water pooling on the bottom of those pools. That could be also an idea.
You talked about a pool of cold water that was near the East River. Is that possible for the spring?
Yes, so there's 2 springs on the other side that they're really cold, and they're pretty cool. Yeah, and I think that's why it's such a good fishing spot in that area. I don't know if you guys are familiar. You've seen those springs, yeah. So that's good. That's really
So is the fact that there's not more of those, is that because there's been some loss of groundwater connectivity?
Well, there's actually a lot of, so one of the reasons you see that the river actually cools down as it goes down is because there are a lot of contributions of springs, and we didn't do a thermal infrared flight, and those really capture absolutely everything, but the float caught quite a bit of that kind of all those dips in those profiles. Those are potential groundwater, and so there's actually a lot of there are a lot of areas with groundwater inputs, around Dickens Sheet, and I'm talking kilometers here, but lower than that, like maybe half kilometer down, there's tons of wetland complexes there. There's tons of groundwater. There's also around where the USGS gauge is, towards town. That whole slope there is, there's tons of groundwater. You can see the seepage, and you can almost see on the gravel, bubbling up water there, groundwater. So yeah, there are a lot of groundwater contributions along the river.
So did you look at all this during a low flow year or a normal flow?
Well, we sampled in 2018, right? Yeah, and 2019. 2015 we didn't. But actually, it's not counterproductive. We've seen in the Point Array that when the flows are low, you actually are able to see those groundwater contributions a little easier because there's less base flow. So in order to see them, a low flow is probably better. But in terms of it's all about proportion. Like in the spring, for example, the water, the surface water, there's so much of it that overwhelms the groundwater contributions. So that doesn't help as much. But when you're at a base flow, right, like in September, before the rains come, that's when the groundwater contributions, you can really detect them better and also make more of a difference. So I think, I haven't really come out at the absolute lowest.
My concern is that during these low flow years, that groundwater isn't that cold.
Well,
because the streams are warm.
Well, the streams, the groundwater comes from the groundwater, so they have a different buffer capacity.
Where does the groundwater come from?
Well, from subterranean, right? So.
Yeah, well, it probably came from the snow melt, and the snow's gone now. So where's the groundwater coming from?
Well, actually, there are 2 different patterns, and they've done quite a bit of studies where you can disentangle that relationship between air temperature, so snow melt kind of things, and groundwater. So as eventually everything is going to warm up, right? Because of climate change. So things are going to warm up, but the groundwater is going to warm up at a slower rate than the snow melt.
As long as it came from snow melt and not warm rain, the recharge to groundwater.
Well, the time frame that groundwater is stored is sometimes millions of years. So we're talking, depending on the groundwater, there's shallow groundwater and there's deep groundwater. So that's like a huge field of research. So we don't have enough time to discuss all this. But the rate at which groundwater, just in a nutshell, warms up versus snow melt streams is a lot slower. But both are going to warm up.
Well, we should wrap it up. Sorry, cut it off. But it's time to wrap it up.